They thought they had defeated God. They thought they had captured his power, locked it in a box, and carried it into the house of their own God. But that night, something moved in the dark. No wind, no voice, no angel. Just silence, thick, alive, and waiting. And by morning, their God, the one they had worshipped for generations, was lying face down in the dirt, bowing before the ark of the Lord. What happened inside that temple? Why did heaven allow his people to fall, only to rise through their defeat? And what unseen force entered that room that made stone tremble, that made idols crumble, and that made proud men weep? This is the story of the day God walked into the house of a false god, and the day that false god bowed before him. The morning began like any other battle day. Dust rising over the hills, soldiers tightening their armor, priests whispering prayers that sounded more like fear than faith. But something was different. The Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that once parted seas and broke walls, was no longer surrounded by worship. It was surrounded by desperation. For years, Israel had drifted, praying with their mouths while their hearts had already left God. They wanted his power, not his presence, and that day they would learn the difference. As the Philistines assembled on the opposite side of the field, their banners rose high, red and black against the morning sun. Their shouts were fierce, mocking, confident. Israel, weary and unsure, raised theirs too, but their voices trembled. Then came the signal, the sound of horns, the stampede of feet, the clash of metal. The battle erupted, and within hours Israel's line broke like glass. Thousands fell. The ground drank their blood. From the dust, a soldier screamed, "Where is the Lord?" But there was no answer. No fire from heaven, no angelic rescue, no whisper of wind. Only silence. Only the sound of men dying and faith collapsing with them. When the survivors stumbled back into camp, their faces were hollow. They couldn't understand it. How could the God who once made Jericho's walls crumble now remain still? How could the God who walked with Moses now seem so far away? Then someone, we don't know who, spoke up. "Bring the ark. If the ark goes with us, God will go with us." And that was the mistake that sealed everything. They didn't want to repent. They wanted to use God. They treated the ark like a weapon, not a covenant. So they brought it, that sacred chest, carried on the shoulders of priests, shimmering in the sunlight. The people cheered as it entered the camp. When the Philistines heard the roar, they trembled at first. They remembered Egypt, they remembered plagues, but pride won over fear. And so the two armies met again. But this time, even with the ark in their midst, Israel fell harder than before. The Bible says the Philistines fought and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. 30,000 soldiers died that day. The ark, the very sign of God's covenant, was taken. Imagine that silence. Imagine watching the symbol of God's presence being lifted by the hands of your enemies, their laughter echoing as they march away. Imagine feeling abandoned. The people of Israel tore their clothes, the priests fell to their knees, and somewhere, in a small house, an old man named Eli, the high priest, sat trembling. When he heard the ark was captured, he didn't speak. When they told him his sons had been killed, he didn't weep. But when they said the ark of God has been taken, something broke inside him. He fell backward from his chair, struck his head, and died. And in that same hour, his pregnant daughter-in-law went into labor. Her pains were sharp, her cries desperate. As she gave birth, she named her child Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. Because it had. God was silent, the ark was gone, and the people who once called themselves chosen were left broken, humiliated, and empty. But here's the strange thing. God didn't lose that day. He allowed himself to be carried away, not in defeat, but in divine strategy. Because while Israel saw loss, heaven saw a setup. The ark wasn't just a golden box. It was the presence of God wrapped in silence. And the Philistines had just taken that presence into the heart of their city. They didn't know it yet, but they hadn't captured a trophy. They had invited the Almighty into the temple of their God. And when the true God walks into the house of a false one, nothing, not even stone, can remain standing. Tell me, what happens when darkness celebrates too early? What happens when men laugh at heaven's silence, thinking they've won? Because that's exactly what the Philistines did. They marched through the gates of Ashdod, cheering, singing, lifting the ark high above their heads. They placed it beside their god, Dagon, as proof that the God of Israel had fallen. They called for feasts, they raised their hands in worship, and they said, "Behold, Dagon has triumphed over the God of Israel." But they didn't know. The ark they mocked was listening. The presence they laughed at was watching. And in the stillness of that temple, between Dagon's cold stone face and the silent ark, heaven was preparing to speak without words. Night came over Ashdod like a heavy blanket. The city slept in drunken victory, but heaven did not sleep. The Philistines had celebrated long into the evening, filling their cups, chanting Dagon's name, their laughter echoing down the stone streets. Inside the great temple, torches flickered against walls carved with the image of their god. Half man, half fish, with eyes of polished stone staring down upon the Ark of the Covenant. They had placed the ark right beside him. To them, it was a symbol of conquest. To heaven, it was the throne of the living God. When the last torch outside the temple went dark, the silence changed. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, the air thick enough to taste, heavy with something unseen. If a man had stood inside that temple, he would have felt it first in his chest. A slow, deep vibration, like the sound of thunder before it breaks. The ark didn't move, yet every particle around it began to tremble. No voice spoke, no wind stirred, and yet the stone walls began to groan softly. Across the city, a stray dog whimpered and fled into the shadows. A priest, sleeping in his chamber nearby, stirred from his dreams, a cold sweat on his skin, his heart pounding for reasons he could not name. The night deepened. If anyone had been standing near the ark, they would have noticed the faintest shimmer in the air, a distortion, as if the very fabric of space bent under a weight it could not bear. Above the ark, unseen by human eyes, light flickered, not the light of fire but of presence, the kind of light that spoke before words were born. It was the same light that hovered over chaos when the world was created, the same radiance that Moses could not look upon and live. And now it stood quietly in the temple of Dagon. The idol towered above, massive, proud, carved with ancient hands that believed they could give a soul to stone. But as the night wore on, something invisible pressed against it, like the tide pushing against a cliff until it breaks. Cracks whispered through its base. A faint hum filled the air, a sound too low for human ears, but strong enough to shake eternity. And then, everything stopped. For one heartbeat, time itself seemed to hold its breath. And in the next heartbeat, Dagon fell. The sound was not of simple stone falling. It was a sound that tore through the silence like judgment. Heavy, final, impossible. His body hit the floor with such force that dust rose and lingered like smoke. The ark did not move. The presence did not shout. Heaven simply was, and that was enough. In that moment, all the unseen powers that had fed on false worship for centuries scattered like ash in a storm. Whatever dark spirit had claimed the temple fled into the night, howling in terror, as if it had been burned by holiness itself. And still, silence. By dawn, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks of the temple walls, illuminating the fallen statue. Dagon, the god of the Philistines, lay face down before the ark of the Lord. His forehead pressed to the ground, his arms stretched forward, as if even in ruin he was forced into worship. When the priests arrived, they froze at the doorway. At first, they couldn't move. Their God, the one they had praised just hours before, was lying in the dirt before the God of Israel. Their hands trembled as they lifted him, dust clinging to their robes. One whispered, "It must be the wind." Another said, "Perhaps the foundation is weak." But none of them truly believed it. For every man standing in that temple felt something he couldn't explain, an invisible weight pressing against his soul, a presence that seemed to see through him. They lifted Dagon upright again, patched the cracks, straightened his crown, but their eyes kept darting to the ark, small, silent, unshaken. They left the temple that night, afraid to speak of what they'd seen, but deep in their hearts, they already knew. Something holy had entered their city. That night, heaven moved again. The same unseen presence filled the temple once more, but this time, it did not come quietly. The air pulsed with a soundless roar. It was not rage, it was authority. Not wrath, but judgment. The statue of Dagon began to tremble. Cracks split across its chest. The floor itself quaked, and the very pillars groaned under the strain. Then, silence again. And suddenly the statue broke. When dawn returned, the priest opened the door and froze in horror. Dagon was on the ground again, but now his head and his hands were broken off, lying at the threshold. Only the torso remained, headless, handless, lifeless. It was no accident, it was a message. The head, wisdom, thought, authority. The hands, power, ability, control. God had not just destroyed their idol, he had dismantled its strength and silenced its mind. The priests didn't speak. No one dared approach the ark. They simply stared. And for the first time, every one of them knew that what stood before them wasn't a god made by hands. It was the presence that made the hands themselves. What happens when the Almighty enters the house of the false? This was the answer. Without a sword, without thunder, without even a word, just presence. The kind of presence that turns arrogance to dust. The kind that bows kings and crushes idols. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself, because everything else simply stops existing in its light. That night, heaven didn't shout, it whispered, and even stone obeyed. The dawn after Dagon's fall was unlike any other. Ashdod awoke to rumors spreading like wildfire, whispers that twisted through the streets before sunrise. Dagon has fallen, one voice said. He bowed before the ark, said another, and though the priests tried to silence the murmurs, fear had already taken root. The once proud city felt colder that morning. Even the wind carried unease, sweeping through narrow alleys and over the sea-salted walls. Children didn't play in the markets that day. Mothers drew their curtains early, and the temple of Dagon, the pride of Ashdod, was suddenly a place no one dared to enter after sunset. But what they didn't know was that the fall of their god was only the beginning. That night, something moved through the city, unseen but unmistakably alive. It was not the whisper of wind or the sound of insects in the dark. It was heavier, thicker. It clung to the air like the aftermath of lightning, invisible, yet leaving a taste of dread on every breath. The people couldn't name it, but heaven could. It was the weight of holiness, the same presence that had shattered idols and silenced angels in awe. And now it moved through a land that had defied it. The first to feel it were the priests. Men who had handled the broken pieces of Dagon now awoke in terror, clutching their bodies in pain. Their skin broke out in sores that burned like fire beneath their robes. They called upon their god, but their god lay in ruins. They burned incense. They cried aloud. They begged for healing. But the heavens remained silent. Then it spread. One by one, the people of Ashdod began to suffer. Their strong men grew weak. Their warriors couldn't lift their swords. The air was filled with the moans of the sick and the wailing of mothers as their sons fell ill. Panic consumed the city. They knew this was not a plague. This was punishment. In the midst of their agony, a realization tore through their hearts. The ark is not a trophy. It's a throne. The same ark they had celebrated now radiated dread. They could feel it even from a distance. That unbearable energy that seemed to pulse with something beyond their understanding. No one could go near it. Animals grew restless. The air around it shimmered like the heat before a storm. And then they began to whisper, "The God of Israel is among us." But this time those words were not spoken in victory. They were spoken in fear. The leaders of Ashdod gathered in secret. They argued through the night. "What do we do?" cried one. "If we move it, he will follow us," said another. "But if we keep it here," said the eldest, trembling, "we will all die." So they made a decision. They would send the ark to another city, Gath, hoping to rid themselves of its curse. They thought distance would save them, but they didn't yet understand something crucial. You can't outrun presence. When the ark entered Gath, the people cheered, unaware of what it carried. For a single night, they celebrated their victory. But before the moon completed its course, the same shadow fell upon them. The strong became weak. The proud bowed low. Men screamed through the night as pain tore through their bodies. Even the air itself seemed to weigh upon their chests. The people of Gath began to weep and curse the day the ark arrived. They begged their rulers, "Send it away. Send it anywhere, but not here." And so they sent it again, this time to Ekron. But before it even reached the gates, the people of Ekron ran into the streets crying out, "Have they brought the ark of Israel's God to kill us too?" The fear had spread faster than the plague itself. Everywhere the ark went, the ground trembled. Everywhere it rested, men fell on their knees. What kind of God is this? Whose silence speaks louder than thunder? Who fights without lifting a hand? Who enters the house of idols, and they crumble just by being near him? And yet, isn't this the same God who once walked with his people, who split seas and spoke through fire? If he could move mountains for love, what happens when that love is mocked? The Philistines were learning the answer. After 7 months of torment, the people cried out. They gathered their priests, their seers, their magicians, anyone who could speak to the unseen. "What must we do to make this stop?" they asked. "How do we send this ark back without dying?" The answer came trembling from one of the elders. "If you send it back, don't send it empty. Return it with an offering," another added, "for perhaps his anger will turn away." So they prepared a strange gift. Golden figures shaped like their afflictions, their tumors, their rats, symbols of their suffering. It was their way of saying, "We know what we've done. We know what you are." When the day came, they placed the ark on a cart drawn by 2 cows that had never been yoked. They didn't guide them. They didn't steer them. They simply watched. And as the sun rose, the cows began to walk, straight toward the land of Israel. They didn't turn aside. They didn't hesitate. Every step was steady, like creatures being led by something unseen. The Philistine lords followed them for miles, afraid to draw near, yet unable to look away. They watched as the ark crossed from their land into the fields of Beth-Shemesh. And there finally the cows stopped. It was over. When the people of Israel saw the ark returning, they wept. They lifted their hands and cried aloud, for what was lost had come home again. But what no one realized was that this story was never just about a box. It was about a God who will never share his glory with another. He doesn't need to raise a sword to prove himself. He doesn't need to speak to make his presence known. All he has to do is be. And when he is, even gods made of stone bow down. Even nations tremble. Even the proudest hearts fall silent. Sometimes we think we can contain God, that we can build walls around holiness or control it when it moves. But this story reminds us, you can't cage the divine. You can't make heaven serve your pride. You can't stand beside his presence and not be changed. He will not compete. He will not share his throne. Every false god will fall before him. And sometimes he doesn't even have to speak for it to happen. Because when the real meets the false, truth doesn't argue, it simply stands, and everything else bows. When the ark returned to Israel, the people rejoiced. They danced. They sang. They thought the nightmare was over. But heaven was still watching, quietly. Because while the Philistines had treated the ark like a trophy, Israel had begun to treat it like a memory. And the presence of God, the same one that had silenced Dagon, crushed pride and humbled nations, was about to remind his own people what holiness truly meant. The ark stopped in a field belonging to a man named Joshua of Beth-Shemesh. He was harvesting wheat when he saw the cart approaching. His tools fell from his hands. He called his neighbors, and soon the whole village gathered, standing in awe as the sacred chest, the very seat of God, returned home. They broke the cart apart and used the wood as fire. They offered the cows as a burnt sacrifice to the Lord. Their voices rose like smoke to heaven, filled with gratitude and tears. But beneath their joy, something else lingered. Curiosity. For years, stories had been told of what lay inside the ark. The stone tablets, the manna, the rod that once bloomed in a desert. Sacred things. Things only the high priest could ever see. And that's when it happened. Some men, driven by awe and pride, decided to lift the lid, just to look, just to see what made it so powerful. Maybe, they thought, if we see inside, we'll understand. Maybe God won't mind. After all, it's back home now. But God doesn't change with location. Holiness doesn't soften because of familiarity. And as soon as their hands touched what was forbidden, a wind tore through the field, though no storm was near. And in a single breath, the presence that had humbled Dagon now turned upon his own people. They fell, hundreds of them, struck down in an instant. The cries of joy turned to screams. The air thickened with fear. The people dropped to their knees trembling, whispering, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God?" And in that moment, they understood. God is not something you carry. He's not something you contain. He's not something you bring into your house and control. He is the house itself. He is the air, the storm, the unseen presence that commands both love and fear. The survivors sent word to the people of Kiriath Jearim, pleading, "Come, take the ark away from us. We cannot bear it any longer." And so the ark was carried away again, not by enemies this time, but by the trembling hands of its own people. They placed it in the house of a man named Abinadab, and there it remained for 20 years. 20 years, hidden, silent, forgotten. But the presence never left. It waited. 2 decades passed. Children grew into adults who had never seen the ark. Prophets came and went. Kings rose and fell. And though Israel still worshipped, something sacred had faded from their hearts. Their prayers became routine. Their songs became empty. Their worship uncomfortable, until one man decided that silence had gone on long enough. David, the shepherd who became king. The boy who once played his harp in the fields and spoke to God as though he were a friend. Now a man crowned, honored, respected, yet restless. Because though he ruled over Israel, he felt something missing, something the palace could never replace, something the throne could never give. He felt the absence of presence. So David said, "We must bring back the ark of our God." He gathered 30,000 chosen men. He prepared instruments of music. He made plans not for battle, but for worship. The ark, the same one that toppled Dagon and humbled nations, would finally return to the heart of Israel. And this time, it wouldn't be hidden in silence. It would be celebrated. But even in celebration, holiness must be handled with fear. As the ark was carried on a new cart, the people sang and danced before the Lord. The earth shook with joy, but when the oxen stumbled and the ark tilted, one man, Uzzah, reached out to steady it. He didn't mean harm. He didn't mean rebellion. He meant respect. But God is not stabilized by human hands. And in that instant, he fell dead beside the ark. The music stopped. The dancing ceased. Every voice fell silent. David himself froze in horror. His joy turned to fear. He whispered, trembling, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" And for months he refused to bring it any further. He left it in the house of Obed-Edom. He turned back, shaken, humbled, afraid. But as time passed, news spread. Obed-Edom's house was being blessed. Everything he touched prospered. His family flourished. His land multiplied. It was as if heaven had made his home, its dwelling place. And David realized, the ark was not a curse. It was a mirror. To the arrogant, it became judgment. To the humble, it became blessing. It did not change. It revealed. When David finally returned to bring the ark home, he came differently, not as a king with power, but as a servant with fear. He wore no crown. He danced barefoot before the Lord, tears streaming down his face, shouting, "This is not my glory. This is his." And the ark entered Jerusalem, not in triumph, but in surrender. Not with pride, but with reverence. The presence had come home, not just to a city, but to a heart that finally understood. And maybe that's the truth behind the whole story. It was never about Dagon. never about the Philistines, never about Israel's pride or victory. It was about one simple thing. The presence of God will never share space with anything false. Not in temples of stone, not in nations, not even in the human heart. Every false god, whether carved of wood or made of ego, must bow. Every idol, every pride, every illusion of control must fall face down before him. Because he is not a God you invite into your plans. He's a God you surrender to. And sometimes, the only way he reminds us of that truth is by letting our Dagon fall. Maybe we've been looking at this story the wrong way. Maybe it wasn't just about a god of stone falling before the ark. Maybe it's about us. Because if we're being honest, we all have a Dagon, not carved from rock, not built in temples, but living inside our hearts. The thing we depend on more than God. The thing we run to for comfort when prayer feels silent. The thing we protect, even when we know it's breaking us. For some, it's pride. For others, it's fear. For others still, it's the need to control what only heaven can hold. We build these idols slowly, choice by choice, excuse by excuse. And before we know it, we've placed them right beside the ark, right beside the presence, as if God will share his throne with something else. But he won't. He never will. Because anything that competes with him must fall. The same God who shattered Dagon still walks into temples today. Not the kind built with stone, but the ones that beat inside your chest. He still moves in silence. He still shakes what we trust. He still topples the things that dare to stand beside his glory. And every time he does, he's not punishing you, he's reclaiming you.